I want to watch it. Yo,
Jump off a high cliff.
no, chat. No. I mean on the dragon. No, hold up. Hold up. Dude, please don't clip that out of context. Okay, so now Towellee's VOD, I believe, has updated. 441. Oh, yeah, dude. We have a whole 15 minutes of this interview. ianinterview.com. Let's get it.
So dragon riding, also insanely fun. I even did the whole little time trials and all that. Found myself just trying to get to like the highest parts of like the southeastern Azure span and then just kind of trying to get from one location to another like it was a challenge on my own. Cool. Now with dragon riding, if I remember from the original interviews that were done, I believe you guys are kind of like moving a little bit of that renown system over to Dragonflight.
Yeah, but it's only
dragon riding. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's not renown specifically. I think renown is.
What
more...
are you guys spamming? So you're going by Towelliee now, nerd. Haha, what's up, douchebag? It's Max from Liquid. Remember me? Me and the guys used to tell you to jump off a cliff. Holy that's so good.
Or an end game zone progression. So
I was wrong about that, by the way. Just letting you know that like dragon riding is not linked to renown. Renown is linked to every zone. Every zone has its own renown.
Our major factions in the 4 zones at endgame.
Okay.
In lieu of like friendly, honored, revered, there's more of a granular renown track for each of those.
Max is gonna freak out soon.
Wait, shout out?
I did professions. Professions is pretty in depth. It's a lot to take in. I remember reading the entire post.
This is
in my
good.
community.
Professions.
We were all just like,
listen to what he has to say
what's
here.
going on? I don't know what's happening. And as I'm doing it on the server, it kind of makes all sense. I did notice that the reagents that we have to collect, I believe, are going to be soul-bound reagents. But once a crafter creates that item, it is BOE, correct? So someone who can masterfully create, like, let's say, a mythic raid item, can they put that on the auction house to sell? Because I guess, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, not necessarily. So I think
that's really good, because like if you just had all these high-level crafters listing this shit on the auction house, it would just be like wowtoken.com, and it would be a big problem. It'd be worse than BOEs ever were. I think it's you have to loot soulbound reagents and then find these people to get them, right?
the very best stuff is generally going to be BOP.
Okay.
But a key piece is that like now you can have a crafter make a BOP item for you through work orders and cooperative crafting, which is something that wasn't possible in the past. And so I think that's for us like a key advance that kind of gets us out of a little bit of the trap that we've been in, or a bind that we've been in with professions in the past, where either, like you said, if they can make great stuff, well then it just and it's BOE, then it just goes on the auction house and like, okay, now you can just use gold to buy your way to the strongest gear. That's never what WoW has been about, and it also risks undermining, you know, other types of gameplay. So we don't do that. Or if the gear is BOP, like back in Burning Crusade, okay, cool, like you potentially have to be a certain profession to make the best BOP stuff for yourself. That limits your options when it comes to picking professions, and it makes professions not about interacting with the community, but about just obtaining a selfish benefit. Here, you could just be a player who gets the base item or the frame that can be crafted into a Mythic Raid quality helmet, but you need to take that to a really skilled blacksmith
one every hour
to complete the process for you and make it for you, and you will end up with a BOP item, but you earned the BOP component to it through your gameplay.
Right. Okay. Because one of those concerns was like, oh, people can just start buying tokens and getting the gold and getting all those 5 pieces of mythic grade quality on the auction house, and they're just going to get decked out. They'll just wait to the end of the tier, you know. I did notice some of the gear was had some equips to it. I actually printed one out here. I'm pretty old school. I print stuff out.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right?
On paper?
Yeah. Yes, this is paper, Ian. It exists still. Can you believe it? Staples still store.
Dude, you know, it'd be hilarious if Ian goes like, yeah, it's crazy you have paper, because he's watching him on Zoom read off of a script, but then Towelliee held up that same script on his desk. What would have been fucking alpha is if he just lifted up a stack of cash when Ian said paper and was just like, yeah, I got fucking paper.
He
and
gave
they
me
just
shit
didn't
'cause I
even
printed
mention
my
it.
shit out. I have my questions all printed out on paper, even with screenshots and everything.
Allied Risk Guard of Companionship. It says here like gain 56 verse per allied group, stacking up to 15 times. I'm not sure if those are just placeholders or is that actually gear that we can craft. And because I'm getting some of those like Najatar vibes with like the extra power in the gear. Can it be used in raids, PvP, Mythic Plus?
Right. So I think numbers there, obviously all like subject to tuning, certainly at this stage. Some of the intent there is exploring, you know, we would call them cantrips, just unique effects on items that may synergize or give you different gameplay.
Crafting gear, by the way.
Unlike Najatar items, I don't think there's the sort of fishing for random outcomes piece of it. I think the goal there, like certainly if those are BOE items, I'm not familiar with the exact item you're referencing, but if I think the intent would be, if it turns out that what's meant is like an entry level epic because of a unique bonus it has ends up being like best in slot or like Dark Moon card level, mandatory, we're going to look at the tuning there, right? The intent isn't that.
Yeah, this definitely screams Eternal Palace. Mythic Gear, Mythic Gear was like super problematic to where you just needed it. It was too good. So
because of that effect, suddenly this over.
Pay very close attention to those equips, because if they become required, then that's a little annoying. I guess the main issue with Benthic, though, looking back, was how like annoying it was to acquire it, because you had to random RNG roll it, where if it's deterministic and you can just buy a crafted piece that has it, then that's not bad if like you can get it on multiple pieces of gear, even if they're good, because everyone will just have it, right?
Shadows gear that's, a tier or two better, or becomes something that you have to buy. Early on, like I think we do expect like a place where BOE crafted gear is relevant, and I think is pretty healthy, is that like the first few weeks of a new expansion where you are just trying to get your pre-raid bis set up and getting whatever you can get your hands on. But I think we want to make sure that once we get past that and the season fully begins, the best gear is coming from raids, dungeons, PvP.
Oh yeah, I have like 8 hours of Evoker gameplay
that were earned by doing those things.
Recorded.
Awesome. We were looking at the Assassination Rogue and Outlaw Rogue tree. We saw that really
raid
crazy
buffs.
but amazing raid utility in there. Is there gonna be more specs bringing that kind of utility?
What a f***ing good
with
question.
Ones that we haven't seen yet? Like, what's going to be like the philosophy behind that, heading into like raiding and Mythic Plus with kind of utility in general?
It's a space we want to explore, but we also want to be careful about going too far. So I think what we're seeing maybe is in this first pass of talents, there's going to be a bunch of experiments and trying to add some cool hooks to different classes and different specs. But once it's all there, we also need to take a step back and also hear from the community where it feels like it might just be too much collectively, and pull back in some spaces and see which ones are more compelling, which ones are feel actually less interesting and maybe more like fiddly min-maxing that isn't quite as.
By the way, spoilers
fantasy.
coming pretty
from
soon.
From an RPG perspective, so much of our game is cooperative in its nature.
Spoilers
whether
all
you're
day
in
today.
a dungeon group, whether you're in an arena team, whether you're going into a raid, and being able to make choices that don't just augment your own capabilities, but boost your buddies around you. Right. That's an interesting space to explore. At the same time, we also want to be mindful that we don't go too far. Like I think I certainly remember pretty well, like actually what we're living through in Classic right now, but like by late Burning Crusade, the breaking point, I think that led to the whole bring the player, not the class proclamation was the state of affairs where like everyone had some different buff and party buff and introduction.
Yeah.
And it just being a raid leader was this giant game of Tetris of like, all right, well, the rogues need Battle Shout, but the warrior to give Battle Shout needs Wind Fury from a shaman. And like, you just get to a point where it was like, sorry, I don't have room for you in the group. Like, no, we have room in the raid, but we don't have room in the party that you need to be in. So sorry, you don't have a spot here. Like that would be too much.
Right.
We think we're pretty far from that, but
man, I'll tell you what, they are definitely, what an insane freeze frame here. Sorry, that distracted me. How I feel about this is, yes, he just mentioned in the last couple seconds that this is where like rating at a point was where it was bring the spec, not the class, or bring the class, not the player, whatever. Okay, and then they made it for a very long time, bring the player, and then now they're very aggressively bringing the game back to bring the class. And that is very dangerous, and they really need to look out for that. Like, absolutely.
But also isn't overwhelming complexity.
Right. So the team is open to just rearranging talents based on feedback if need be or whatnot.
Oh, totally.
We just need to get there first.
Yep, exactly. And really, like this first, like getting them out there is the starting point of a conversation that we are very eager to have in the months to come. To get the talent trees to a place where it feels like there are interesting choices and choices that feel good to make.
Get ready.
Not choices, the choice might be interesting, but if you're taking it out of social pressure and it feels like you're sacrificing your own performance because the group is making you, that might not feel very good. And so we want to be very sensitive to all of that.
Right. How many loadouts are we going to be able to have within that talent tree, and can it be import and exportable as well to other players?
That's a great question. I think loadout wise, I forget the exact number is a bit subject to change. I think we're looking like at least 6 to 8. Want to make sure that really like if you have different specs, PvP, dungeon, solo, AoE, like there are some technical constraints in our ability to store like infinite, but we want to make sure that people feel like they have enough. If it feels like we need more, we'll look to give you more. The idea of like importing and exporting and saving and sharing builds is a really cool one. It's something that I don't know if we'll be able to have it in at launch, but the team has definitely talked.
You need to have that in at launch. I mean, someone is just going to make an add-on for it, but like that, I mean, that absolutely should be in at launch, right? I mean, like so many of what they do with good systems is they like literally take good add-ons that already exist and put them into the game. There's nothing wrong with when any game does that. You're just going to be doing that later. And unless it's like for some reason, like a big developmental issue. Oh, dude, thanks for the sub, Preach. Wait, you've been subbed to me for 2 years?
So as I was in the alpha there, I can't believe I didn't do it. I've been questing and just playing around for a couple of days, and I said, oh, let me hit Shift J. There's no way that the raids are already up or the dungeons are already there. So I saw Vault of the Incarnates, huh?
Yep.
That's very exciting. 8 boss raid, which is awesome, better than 11.
Oh, am I going to be able to look at the bosses today?
Notice right now there was already tokens.
Once again, the name of the raid is Vault of the Incarnates.
Oh, dude, holy fuck. Okay, I have way too much stuff to do.
Boss raid.
To turn in for tier set, which are higher item level than the rest of the gear, all subject to change, I'm sure.
Yep.
So is there going to be any kind of changes in that raid to the whole looting system, or is there any kind of like, maybe might be totally talk about it, but any kind of fight design philosophy going into Dragonflight as opposed to the previous expansions?
It probably won't be as punishingly difficult as Sepulcher. So some lessons learned there. There probably won't be, you know, abilities where failing to execute it on heroic wipes your entire raid. So.
That's really important. All I will say is I hope that Blizzard doesn't do what they have done in the past at other points where they have made an overcorrection. So like, yes, Sepulcher for the entire community was clearly too hard. However, I hope they don't overswing and make them too easy and do like another Emerald Nightmare. Like, people mention Emerald Nightmare. Like, dude, I think Sepulcher was just as much of an outlier as Emerald Nightmare was, just in the opposite direction. So I just hope they don't swing back.
So we give up. The team was collectively in a bit of an arms race with, you know, Echo and Liquid. And all right, you know what? We give up. You guys win. We're not going to try to
expansions.
So we give up. The team was collectively in a bit of an arms race with, you know, Echo and Liquid. And all right, you know what? We give up. You guys win. We're not going to try to make encounters that are uniformly challenging at that level because it's not the best experience for the player base as a whole. Loot-wise.
Okay, so we're about to get into loot-wise, which is interesting, but there's a lot to unpack there. So basically what they're saying, so in the past, I think they've made decisions based on catering to the race world first, and it's not something that we've ever wanted. It's actually stuff that they do to us to hold us back from ourselves that just negatively affect the rest of the entire WoW raid or WoW player base. Like a great example of that, this raid was tier bonuses, right? Because they didn't want us to acquire tier faster to make it harder to tune, they made tier not drop shoulders and chests not drop out of the vault on the first week, making it harder to obtain tier for the entire community, which changed nothing for us. They made that change for us. It didn't really affect us, and it just affected everyone else. And the same thing with the Mythic 0 boxes and the normal boxes, where you could do 4 Mythic 0 dungeons and get a box of normal. The only reason that did not drop tier bonuses was to prevent the Race World First guilds from getting tier. Basically, anytime they make a decision to in any way affect us, it just negatively affects the game just 100% of the time. And it doesn't even help us. It usually just like makes it worse for us too. So the fact that Blizzard is basically saying we're just going to let you all do what you're going to do, which we're obviously all going to do anyways. Like, look at the difference between Master Loot and Personal Loot. Master Loot is deterministic, and yes, we do just as many runs on Master Loot as we do now. It's not going to make us less degenerate, but at least we're getting the loot that we're trying to get. It's just deterministic. It's just there. Like, you're just getting gear. In Personal Loot, for example, you're doing that many runs for a chance that someone loots a helm on the first boss and then again on the 9th boss, and they can trade that helm. And that just feels like shit. So, like, hopefully and I've heard this internally as well, that basically during their, look back at 9.2, they identified that they made more decisions based on the race to world first in this patch than they had previously. You could very clearly tell that with the way that they tuned every boss from Halandris onwards. The game has never been like that. Not even in just the difficulty of the fights, but the way that they tuned them for the gear we had. They're not going to do that anymore. And that's good, because they've made raids in the past where they didn't do that, and they were great raids. I don't think it's going to make raids too easy. It's just that, like, I'm glad they have that perspective, because it helps no one when they try to make decisions for us. Continuing on, though.
We are pretty excited. We're currently exploring the return of group loot for raids.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So,
What does that mean? Like master loot? Is that what group loot means? Because group loot's literally something else, right? Isn't it need, greed, pass? It's not exactly master loot. I mean, it's basically master loot. Like you could go into a run, tell everyone not to need on an item, and then one person needs, and it's basically master loot. We'll let him elaborate.
specifically for raid bosses. Like I think we talked about personal
Okay, specifically for raid bosses, so not Mythic Plus.
group loot, over the years, and I think by and large, personal loot as it has stood works fine for the vast majority of the game. Like
Yes,
when
it
you're
does.
killing a random mob in the outdoor world, totally fine. Even for dungeons, I haven't heard anyone
You're
saying,
welcome,
you know what, I miss running a dungeon and getting a hunter bow
You're welcome,
with no
Max and
hunters in my
THC.
5-player group. Boy, that was good. Can't we have that back? Like, no, dungeon loot feels fine also. I think it's more like raids because they're uniquely a large-scale cooperative endeavor that lend themselves to the ability to cooperate and distribute the loot in a more social method if you want
There's
to do
more,
so.
by
So I
the
think
way.
we want to get back to a place where you're killing a literal dragon this time, actually killing a dragon,
Right,
looking at the dragon's corpse, and there's 5 items on the corpse, and roll on them, pass, trade them around without restriction.
Without
but also that
restriction.
will mean that if you don't have any hunters in your raid, you might see a bow and have no one to use it on. But that's
So you can trade everything without restriction, which makes sense. I mean, if you have group loot, you could have 20 people all need on it, and then you can just, whoever wins it, trades it to the other person. So it's trading and need, so you don't get fucked by, like, needing it, for example.
maybe you should bring a hunter.
Without restriction.
Yeah, that is an interesting difference, though, between the way that personal loot in the past has worked versus how group loot or master loot work, is that you could run no hunters and 0 male characters in your entire raid, and it was fine, and your gear would be tailored to your group type. But like now it's kind of interesting because you kind of want to at least have one male person, because 25% of the gear that's going to drop is going to be relevant to them, and it will literally go to waste if you don't have one. So it's like you're having dead drops. So it does actually make you need to bring every class, which is kind of interesting.
Right. No, absolutely. And in terms of, I guess I could call it like post RWF, or Race to World First power progression for, I guess, the rest of us, the simpletons that are just regular cutting edge raiders. Is there going to be any kind of power increase in that first season of the raid, so we don't kind of encounter kind of what we did in Sofo, where we're all just kind of like at the same item level and we just didn't really gradually get stronger than those top guilds, and you guys just had to obliterate the raid?
Yes, I mean, so some of that obviously gets back to just the original tuning targets and how much in the way of nerfs is required. I think we'd like to explore. We don't have a specific plan locked in yet, but we'd like to explore. This is really a raid specific problem, and we'd like to explore. Systems like, I think back in Uldir at the start of Battle for Azeroth, built into the Azerite armor that you got from Uldir was kind of a scaling buff that you could get that served as a soft nerf. It wasn't like distorting the power scale everywhere else in the game.
Right.
So I think we've wanted to actively move away from the sorts of so-called borrowed power progressions like artifact power or whatever else.
But every other version of this is that, though. Like domination shards got stronger every week for a while, and it naturally nerfed the raid. Like every version of this that's ever existed, most of them are borrowed power, though.
You want to just focus on you're leveling up, you're getting talent points, you're growing your character that way, and you're getting more gear. But we also understand there is a lot of value in a raid group week 8, week 12 of a tier, feeling like, even if I didn't get an item this week, I'm making some forward progress in my ability and
So
my
like an
group's ability
internal raid
to overcome
power
this thing
boost.
we're stuck on. Like we're still going to hand tune and we're going to nerf where appropriate,
Okay.
but I think we'd like to have some kind of built-in raid progression.
Like Uldir.
Because really, that same problem doesn't exist in.
But I mean, that's literally borrowed power, kind of. But I mean, like, that's fine, I guess. It's fine if it doesn't change the way you play your class and give you haste and shit, where it feels worse the next patch when you log in. A couple people in chat have been saying, oh no, this is so bad that Master Loot is back. Hey, so here's the deal. If you guys don't want to use Master Loot, just don't. And if you're in a guild that currently uses personal loot and doesn't make you trade that gear like master loot when it's tradable, just tell your guild master as a group of raiders, be like, hey, we want to stay personal loot for a whole expansion. I would bet that more guilds will use personal loot going forward because they're used to this than ever going back to master loot, and that's totally fine. Who cares? You should do it. Just do that. Like, that's fine. Like, it's not a big deal. Also, very interesting is the last time in this game when personal loot and guild master loot existed, personal loot actually dropped more gear to make up for the fact that it was random. That could be the case in Dragonflight. They haven't asked that question. So you need to find that out.
Dungeons or PvP or elsewhere. In fact, like honestly, gear inflation and things like that can be problematic in PvP if it increases the gap and makes it harder to get your foot in the door as a new player when everyone is fully decked out.
Awesome.
Quick, you should interview him, Max. You know what? I agree, Quick. That would be cool. I was told a while ago that like I was gonna interview him back when everyone else was interviewing a couple months ago, and then I told them, like, they were like, yeah, let's do an interview, and I was like, okay, let's push it back because there's a bunch of interviews. I'd like to do one around the Dragonflight Alpha. I've inquired about it a few times since, and been kind of ghosted, which is fine. And the last time I heard is that they wanted to do it later on, closer to when the raids were out. But none of my questions are really about the raids. So, but you know what, Quick, that is an excellent
Six
idea.
classes. That's it. Being probably never.
I tried.
Will Evokers ever be a tank in World of Warcraft? I tried.
I mean,
be a 3 at least.
nothing. I mean, I would never say never to anything. I know better.
If they release this class with only 2 specs, the likelihood that they would add a spec to a class at any point just sounds really unrealistic. I guess the only time they've ever done that is when they added Guardian to Druid, I guess. But that wasn't really what they did. They just, like, it was basically already 2 separate things, and they just made it the same.
At this point, like in 2032, it'll be like, but you promised this would never happen.
We wouldn't do that. What do you mean?
Like a like a 3 probably. I mean, at this point, really.
That's way fucking higher than I thought it would be. I wonder if he's saying that just to give people hopium and not let their, like, dreams die. But, like, 3, if that's actually an honest 3, that's insanely higher than I thought.
Evokers we've had plenty of melee hero classes in the past.
He said 3 out of 10.
Tanks.
3 out of 10.
This is designed as a caster, as a ranged class. A lot of the things that are
Towelliee
core
just
and universal
fakes,
across
dude.
the entire class
He actually just
are cast time abilities that aren't super compatible with tanking. The fantasy of being a mobile dragon that moves around the battlefield, unleashes breath weapons, etc. Again, that lends itself to ranged DPS, healing, support, not standing still in front of a monster taking punishment. So no tank plans in the works here.
Okay, cool. I saw the obsidian armor stuff, and I right in the beginning, I was like, oh, I could definitely make this guy a tank. And I just went down, I'm like, oh, it's so sad I can't. The plan that you guys have for the season 1 for Mythic Plus is to have 4 of the new dungeons, 4 old school dungeons.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few of the dungeons already on there, not to play, but you can just see it in the journal. Are those 4 old school dungeons going to be chosen by the community like the 2 from Draenor were, or are you guys choosing those on your own?
We're choosing these on our own.
Okay.
Though certainly, look forward to hearing all the discussion and
Dude, okay, so the number 1 comment is going to be like, yeah, because the last time the community they picked Grimrail, fucking idiots. Okay, I think there would be better choices than Grimrail and WoD, but for someone who actually went on the Season 4 PTR, when the keys weren't even supposed to be live and it was an older version that was super bugged, we did Grimrail like 2 or 3 times, and it's not nearly as bad as people are reading about it as. It's actually, like, pretty short. We did it on the worst mods. We were doing it on Sanguine Storming, dude. And it was fine. Like, people are insanely overreacting to that pick.
requests for what dungeons people want to see in the future. And obviously happy to bring back fan favorites now that we have really the entire range of dungeons to choose among. So yeah, I think the current plan, we do have our 4 already picked out for season 1. It's a couple of Legion dungeons, a Warlords dungeon, and a Mists dungeon. I think we're doing Temple of the Jade Serpent from Mists, Court of Stars from Legion. You can play some Guess
Best
Who.
dungeon of all time.
So he only gave me 2 of the 4 dungeons. So Court of Stars and Jade Serpent Temple are 2 of the confirmed.
And then he said 2 Legion dungeons and 1 WoD dungeon. So they'll be bringing back another WoD dungeon. I really hope it's Everbloom or Skyreach. And then 1 more Legion dungeon. What's the other best Legion dungeon? Halls of Valor is not linear, but it's super long. And I think shorter dungeons are better. Maybe Darkheart Thicket. Maybe Mauve Souls. Dude,
Yeah.
what a man of taste.
So those are fun routing experiments.
yeah.
And yeah, a couple of others.
Okay. Yeah, I was really scared you were actually going to choose Shadowpan Monastery. I was going to quit the game tomorrow.
What don't you like about Shadowpan
It's
Monastery?
terrible.
I offended him.
No, really.
I actually offended
I'm
him.
serious.
I never liked the whole layout of it. I always found it to be very.
He was
just
actually
like,
like,
you're
what
always
the fuck
kinda
at me,
slowed
bro?
down either by the storms or the bridge, and I hated that last part because you just skip it anyway, right? Like everyone just goes to the right, skips through the ice, and
I mean, that depends on your enemy forces target. But
that's true.
I would say it's not happening. It's not coming for season 1, but I would say Shadowpen Monastery. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it at some point over the course of Dragonflight.
Why'd I say anything?
But
I think Shadowpan Monastery would be a horrifically bad Mythic Plus dungeon.
I think, particularly for the older dungeons, the ones that never had Mythic Plus, like the team is super open to making changes to the flow of the dungeons, looking at pacing, looking at mechanics that made sense.
Dude, it's long, linear, and like has boss fights. One boss fight that I think wouldn't transfer at all.
For like a heroic dungeon queue experience, but didn't make as much sense or wouldn't make sense if you're, in the Mythic Plus timed format. So we're not necessarily just saying this is how it was, so we're going to copy paste it and change nothing. So all of that feedback is super welcome.
Awesome. And are there going to be any new affixes coming our way in the first season of Dragonflight? And is Tyrannical and Fortified sticking around?
Current plan is yes for Tyrannical and Fortified is just a bit of just week to week texture of focus more on the bosses this week, more on.
I don't have an issue with Tyrannical and Fortified, but someone who's done like an infinite and more live Mythic Plus than I do probably has different opinions. I've heard that Tyrannical isn't nearly as bad since they've nerfed Tyrannical earlier in
the trash other weeks. We are planning a new seasonal affix, so I think we are looking to simplify our seasonal affixes a bit. I think in a world where the dungeon pool was static for the entire expansion, a primary function of a seasonal affix was to really shape.
This is a really fucking good take.
Your
this is a
routing
good
to
take.
the dungeon. But when we have all new dungeons this time that present fresh problems to solve,
this is a good take.
We don't need to do that. Routing is already a new thing for people to figure out.
Yep.
So I think we can focus more on something that's a bit easier to understand and thematic to the raid boss or the other story of that season.
Now,
Okay, that being said, so he's totally right. You need more elaborate, interesting seasonal affixes when you are doing the same dungeons for 2 years. But now that is not the case, you don't need to be you don't need to try as hard with them. Like a good example would be Season 4. Like Season 4's affix is very basic, right? It's if you're seeing all new dungeons, the idea isn't you need some crazy thing. That being said, though, I don't think it's a coincidence that Awakening and Encrypted were the two best seasonal affixes by far, and they both involve some way to skip past trash naturally with the affix. So getting Woe Drifter or just going underground in Awakening and going past a bunch of other mobs. I think they can do this simple affix. I just think they should incorporate that element of being able to skip around without a shroud, like a Woe Drifter buff. I think they should make that part of Mythic Plus. I think it makes the seasons so much more fun when they exist that they don't need, if they're going to make them simple, I don't think they need to totally move away from it. I think just making that a part of Mythic Plus in general would actually just make the content better.
I was doing some dragon grinding.
No, chat, stop with the rogues would be mad. Rogues are still good, and you still shroud.
What would you say would be the average? I hope it doesn't happen again. 60 to 70 in Dragon.
Dude, such a good thing. Other MMOs do this excellently. I think WoW needs to get with the times. When you level your main character to max level, your alt character getting leveled should be a completely incomparable experience to your main. You should almost instantly, if not at the very least, level to max level in half the time that your main did in just pure efficiency. I'm not counting reading quest text and shit. I mean you should just level way fucking faster on your ults. It is ridiculous that alt leveling in this game is the way it is at the beginning.
Because I always thought I was kind of short in Shadowlands, and I kind of like more of the Draenor style storytelling and the how do we say, the flow of that expansion. Well, how many hours do you think we're going to be leveling in Dragonflight to get right to the end game?
It's hard for me to I can't just pick an exact number because really there's a huge variance depending on are you power leveling? Do you have a guide that you're following, or are you just kind of exploring, doing stuff as you come across it? I'd say probably a little bit longer than Shadowlands, but not too much longer. I think what we want to do is offer more freedom as you level. I think Shadowlands leveling saw each zone being a fairly linear sequence of narrative chapters that would unfold. We still have, certainly your first time through the story on your first character in Dragonflight, we want you to play through the main campaign over the course of the 4 zones so you kind of understand the stakes, you're being introduced to the different factions. But we really we're thinking of it more as some bookends or key pillars narratively in each zone, and a lot more freeform room to explore and decide whether you want to help this group or that group. And also, get an early start on what will become endgame progression and endgame systems, so that the time, if you choose to spend it there, not just beelining through the narrative, isn't wasted. It's giving you a little bit of a leg up.
It'll take a little bit longer than
Shadowlands
to hit max level.
Anyway. Really, we want the general vibe here to be one that is inviting and open to exploration. And so to some extent, the open layout of the zones, I think if you're bouncing around Azure Spam, like, it's a big zone. I think it's
I have way less issues with leveling in zones being linear than like anything else, like your dungeon route or the way you progress through something in the game. Chat, he said systems. Okay, guys, systems should not be a buzzword. It's okay. Things you guys like are a system.
Probably literally the biggest expansion zone that WoW has had ever. That's by design. We want you to feel like there are many open paths for you to choose among, even as there is that story thread pulling you forward.
And just last question, I know we only have one left here. With dragon riding, are you gonna go as far as allowing us to discover some like really cool parts of the world that like maybe leveling players might not be able to discover yet? Some like end game stuff like finding world bosses or rare monsters or caves and treasures or whatnot?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think with flying or things like it, traversal can give you access to new areas, and if we can assume that you can't access those areas right away, we can put some special or more exclusive things there. It wouldn't necessarily be leveling characters versus max, though, because our intent with the dragon riding upgrade system is that is account wide. Like, we feel like, right, it's once you've upgraded your bigger...
Dude, okay, speaking of all the negative buzzwords that exist in World of Warcraft, one positive one is ever mentioning account-wide for anything. It could actually mean nothing. Nothing farms pogs from a WoW developer more than saying anything is account-wide at all.
Max and stuff like that. You're not going to want to repeat that process in subsequent characters. It'll just make playing other characters feel worse. But certainly, like... getting better at dragon riding.
You all hear Towelliee just popping off in the back.
Max and stuff like characters versus max, though, because our intent with the dragon riding
literally pog account wide
upgrade system is that is account wide. Like, we feel
here he goes.
Right, it's once you've upgraded your bigger max and stuff like that, you're not going to want to repeat that process in subsequent characters. It'll just make playing other characters feel worse. But certainly, like, getting better at dragon riding, letting you reach new places, is for sure part of the overall vision.
Account wide.
Well, Ian, thank you very much for hanging out, man.
And that was it. That was the interview. I mean, the interview will be up on YouTube, I think.
Dude, hell yeah. Dude, Towellee's so hated, but he's a content god. Dude, honestly, I don't fuck with you at all if you hate Towelleee. Like, if you don't like his content, that's something. But if you legit hate that person for some reason, I actually don't get that at all. He's as real as they come, man. He's an absolute OG streamer, and he was literally broke as fuck, like, came up from nothing and built his whole career off of this with, like, nothing to come from it before that. Like, I have nothing but respect for that dude. Like, hating him, if you hate him, I hate you. Like, actually, straight up. That's just true.